The Locked On Podcast Network presents the College Sports Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in college sports. From our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. Bringing you the real story. Why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The College Sports Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in college sports.
Hawkeyes, Cyclones, it's Cy-Hawk Week, and we're going to cross it over.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes.
As Iowa State looks to end the losing streak in Jack Trice Stadium, Iowa, on the other hand, looks to avenge last year's loss 2019 in Kinnick Stadium, where the Cyclones have now won two in a row. It's been a funky series. It's been a rivalry game that is exactly like you anticipate. It has been, you never know what's going to happen. There's been major upsets that have been pulled in this game. In fact, I want to start right there because for the first time, it really feels like the foot, it's flipped, right? We've had so many times in the past where we've seen Iowa State maybe struggling early in the season, and you anticipate that Iowa State's going to struggle again, and then they go and pull the upset. In fact, even last year, that 21-3 win against North Dakota in week number 1 for the Cyclones, kind of ho-hum. Iowa cruised in the second half against Illinois State, and of course, we knew what happened in that one. Does it feel a little bit odd to you, Nick, just how it feels a little bit inverse in this rivalry matchup from what we're used to?
There is a piece of me that's like slightly concerned, because it feels like too good to be true. I'm so used to being like the underdog, if you will. I think Iowa State is like around a 3-point favorite, so pretty much a pick 'em in this one, but still being on the favorite side, it's very odd. And I can see exactly why, especially after Iowa's showing last week, but more so from the Cyclone side. That does not mean, though, that I am not nervous, because this, and I have said this 1,000 times, rivalry games, the playing field is level. There is so much emotional charge, especially in this rivalry, which I know Scott Docterman doesn't agree, but I think this is a top probably 20 rivalry in the entire nation. You just never know what's going to happen.
And we've seen that so many times in the past. For the Hawkeye fan side, I'll give you you can give a perspective on Iowa State, the way the season's gone. For Iowa, just my look, it's once again more of the same from a season ago and really the last 5 years. The struggles in the passing game, that was the big takeaway from week number 1. It wasn't the 300 yards passing. It wasn't 7 points given up. It was about the passing game once again and just how inept that they looked. And, one thing that I said, Nick, is you can argue away in a non-conference game that you're going to dominate 44 yards passing the way that Iowa plays, but you can't do it looking like Mark Gronowski looked, because it wasn't just the 44 yards. It was just how terrible he looked in the game and how much he struggled on some very simple throws. So for the Cyclone fans that maybe just don't check in a whole lot on Iowa, I'm sure most everybody does. There's your takeaway here. The Iowa passing game looks like crap once again.
Yeah, well, there was a couple clips that made it to my timeline of Mark Gronowski, and I was like, ooh, that one was rough. Oof, that one was also rough. And they happened to be, I believe, back-to-back, if I'm not mistaken. I was like, oh, that is really unfortunate, because the rest of the game did appear to go well for Iowa with, over 300 yards on the ground. I think is something we can't ignore going into this week, and we'll touch on keys to the game later. But yeah, not a great start for Iowa. Iowa State, on the other hand, seems to have the ball rolling, and Mauser and Campbell, I believe, both touched. And I'm 99% sure Mauser was the only one, but either way, one of the two or both definitely touched on momentum going into this game, how they reset. It's hard to ignore what Iowa State is doing right now. Going over to Dublin and defeating a conference rival in the way that they did, and then coming back and defeating South Dakota 55-7, a team that a lot of people thought was going to give Iowa State trouble, obviously, with travel and being one of the better FCS teams out there. Iowa State looks really good. Rocco Becht looks really good. Not something I think Iowa fans want to hear, because it does feel like it's usually Iowa State is in the other side of this whole thing, but no, it's a great time to be a Cyclone.
It really is. That 2-0 start. That takes me to another one. And we're so used to, in the Matt Campbell era, them getting off to slow starts. And until last season, that had been a major conversation piece about just how different that they looked. And because the season began a week earlier for Iowa State, the practice reps they were able to get leading into that game over in Ireland. Then you couple of it, what they do. Kansas State didn't look very good. Jet lag, kind of things, where Iowa State did. but it really feels like all the components, all those little things that come up, and regardless of who you're a fan of, that seem to come up throughout the course of the year, a lot of those things have had their holes punched in them lately. The slow starts to the season, the special teams, it almost feels like now across the board, Matt Campbell, there's very few question marks about this program.
Oh, absolutely. I said last year once Iowa State beat Miami, I thought, it's hard to really buy into the momentum for a bowl game just because it's an entirely different team and the games are like 6 or 8 months apart. Like, is there really momentum there? The last year, I actually thought there was. I thought the way that they won that game, the way they fought through, obviously, Rocco and everything with the injury side of the linebackers and the tight ends and yada, yada, yada. I thought Iowa State got some momentum going into the off season. And this year, it seems to be that they kept it. It seems like they just took it, what they had last year, which was one of maybe the best season in Iowa State history, and they are running with it now. And I couldn't, obviously, offense, defense, special teams, it's hard to really evaluate Iowa against Iowa State. But right now, with what Flora is doing in the kick return and punt return game, I think Iowa State might have all three sides of this ball right now. And now, granted, they have an extra game. They have a little bit of a larger sample size, but it's hard not to pick Iowa State in all three for myself.
They have a lot of advantages, which is crazy to say. And that's another thing is we talked about the rivalry component. Rivalry upsets happen all the time, but I've been doing this on the radio for over 20 years now. So I definitely know the beats of this game, not just as a fan, but also trying to break it down and try to call it as close to down the middle as I can. It's very rare that I come into a game and have as many advantages on the Iowa State side that I do. Obviously, the quarterback position, huge advantage over there. Running back, I think you're arguing wide receiver. You definitely have to go Iowa State just because, well, Iowa wide receivers hasn't been a lot there. The tight end position, normally one that's always on the Iowa side. I argue not just the top one, the top two, the tight end room is an advantage for Iowa State. I'd give the Hawkeyes the edge at offensive line, but we're talking about 4 or 5 positions that go Iowa State's way. That's something that just so rarely happens from my perspective going into the game. And again, probably another one of those reasons that I think a lot of Cyclone fans are very optimistic about this one.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the argument at offensive line is an interesting one because I'm not necessarily arguing with you. I think it's almost a coin flip at the offensive line position. And I think it's pretty clear that the other ones are all Iowa State. So this is really an argument for, is it an Iowa State sweep or not? We've seen Rocco Beck evade like crazy in the pocket. So how much will it affect his passing? I don't know yet. I think he's got the capability to extend that play. And then you look at what Iowa State was able to do to Kansas State in the third, fourth quarter of that game once their cleats were able to actually stick into the mud. I mean, there is an argument where Iowa State's line can figure it out. Are they perfect? No. Is that one of my areas of concern? In relative terms, yeah, you could say that. But I do think that there is potential. The ceiling is there that they can figure this out and literally win out the entire offensive side, which when was the last time when was the last time that was said? Ever.
Nick, I think I found the key, the big key for Iowa if they are going to pull off this upset win. And we can go into the standard adages, right? Win the turnover battle. Yeah. We go back to the last 2 victories for Iowa in that building. Sebastian Castro 2 years ago, the pick 6. Before that, Jack Campbell, the scoop and score that went in. Go 2 years before that. The punt returners running into each other. One of my favorite moments we'll get into a little bit later on.
I'm sure it is.
Turnovers are always a key to any football game, right? But I think I have something. Before we get to mine, though, I want to hear your key. If you had to only pick one thing, Iowa State's going to win the game, and they're going to win it because of this.
It's so tough to just pick one. It really is, because I think Iowa State does have a few areas where they it's like non-negotiable. For me, after the conversations I've had around this game, it's going to come down to, can Iowa State get pressure on Gronowski? I believe at this point, Iowa State is second worst in FBS at a 17.7% rush or pressure rate, ridiculously low. I understand the concept of dropping a ton of guys and rushing 3. I get it. I understand where you're coming from. But if you can get pressure on Gronowski and force Iowa to run the ball, I don't know if that is going to be enough for Iowa to win. I think that we can shut the run game down with our linebackers. And if you're getting pressure on Gronowski, when he has to throw, it's a recipe for disaster. Like, that is how I'm looking at this game. You're not going to completely stop the run. But if you can put a brunt, kind of a little bit of a stunt on that, get the pressure on Gradowski when they have to throw. That, to me, Iowa State's coming away with this win.
So the one thing that I looked at as I was going through all the different numbers, and one thing that I stumbled across, it hasn't happened very often this year, but Rocco has really struggled against pressure. Now, every quarterback struggles against pressure, right? The gap between when you're in a clean pocket and when pressure is there is always significant for everyone, but I think it was even more significant for Rocco. But taking it a step further, Rocco Becht has been outstanding against the blitz this year. 3 touchdowns of his 5 have come with a blitz package. So to me, it is not as simple as getting pressure on him, because you can get pressure on him, he gets it away, you're going to be in trouble. It has to be Iowa's front 4 that generates that pressure. And that means Max Llewellyn needs to get there. Ethan Hurka needs to get there. The deep stable that they have in that defensive line. Aaron Graves, though he's a defensive tackle, he's been outstanding both for tackles and loss of getting there. So if I was going to win this game, I believe that they're going to have to do it with pressure. Not just pressure with the front 4. That, I think, can change the complexion of this game, and then being able to obviously cover in the back end, because Iowa has questions in that back end. They have questions in the defensive backfield that they normally don't. We saw it show up last year in Kinnick Stadium with the 75-yard touchdown from Jalen Null. And a lot of those still haven't been answered. Xavier Wampa didn't show much in game number 1. The cornerbacks are still incredibly green. TJ Hall, he was targeted 3 different times on the Albany drive that led to their only touchdown of the football game. So you have the questions back there. Then if you have to bring extra people in order to get that pressure, I think Iowa's going to be in trouble. So to simple it down to kind of one major thing, that's the biggest one to me.
The NFL season is finally here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. I got a lot of bets in week 1. I'll tell you that. A lot of lines that I like. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet.
Vanderbilt will enter Blacksburg and Lane Stadium. They will leave with a victory.
You are Locked On Vandy, your daily podcast on the Vanderbilt Commodores.
What this game means, what the impact of this game is. And when you look at this matchup, just as a pure matchup, not much impact there, not much rivalry. I mean, I think there's a little bit of banter, a little bit of small ounce of rivalry because of the most recent result, but I don't think these two teams have a history, nor will they ever have a history. So this game in that regard is just your typical non-conference game. But for Vanderbilt, it does mean a lot more. And actually for Virginia Tech, it means a lot more for their own sake, not necessarily for the matchup sake, but for their own sake. Like Virginia Tech, their coach is on the hot seat. Brent Pry, the fan base is about ready to turn on him. I read reports today that they had a players-only meeting, and those are never good. And so things are in a little bit of turmoil up there in Virginia Tech, if I'm reading the tea leaves right. If I'm reading that they had a players-only meeting and that's true, then I think there's some real trouble there because there's nothing good that can come from those player meetings. For Vanderbilt, and that's the team I want to focus on more about as far as the impact goes. This is our first true road test of the year. And this is their first time as a more veteran-laden team, as a more experienced team than they were last year, as a deeper team than they were last year, and realistically, a better team than they were last year. This is their first true test of the season. On the road against a really formidable, great defense, especially along the defensive line. You're going up against a super talented quarterback on the other side, and they're well coached. And despite what you think about Brent Pry and his, however he has it together, I think the importance of this game is that of which I think Vandy, if they want a shot, I think they have to win this game, obviously. And I'm always going to say they have to win this game, but this is an important springboard for them because they've got a South Carolina team that they haven't really found their identity yet. They really haven't found themselves yet. Now, they play South Carolina State, so they'll get to work out a few kinks, but like they're a team that's still looking for themselves. They're a team that's still trying to get Lenore Sellers into the groove and to take that next step as a quarterback. He still didn't really take the next step as a quarterback against Virginia Tech. And this is a game, this is a matchup where I think Vanderbilt has a chance to really put themselves in a good position to win not only this week, but I think if they can win this week and do so in a way that I'm not saying blowout. No, there's not going to ever, there's no chance of a blowout here. I don't think it, either way, I think it's going to be a tight game, but I think if they win this game, they set themselves up to win another very tough road game at Williams-Brice. So this game could set them up with the confidence of that. So the impact of this is being able to get those reps at a hostile road environment, being able to get Diego Pavia and this offense some looks against a really good defense, and for this team to gain a ton of confidence, for this team to gain buckets of confidence. So I'm really excited about the impact of this game. I think there's a lot on the line here. I think if they win this game and they win it, and if they can do so even in a fairly convincing fashion, I think they have a chance of getting 9 this year if they can get this one, because there's some teams out there on this conference schedule that's a little shaky right now. And, I think Vandy can play their way into, a pretty good season, but it starts tomorrow against Virginia Tech in Blacksburg. And like I said, if they can win convincingly, they can get the crowd out of it. And I'm going to tell you why here in just a minute. We're going to kind of go over what they need to do, but I do think they get it done. And that's kind of my early prediction. And we'll get into the steadfast prediction, but this game could catapult their season. And that's kind of what it truly means. So how are they going to get it done? Well, here's how they're going to get it done. Okay. Here's the keys to success. This is kind of the overview of those keys to success. I think for the offense, we'll start there because Diego Pavia is obviously the most important part of this. But I think in order for Diego Pavia to have a really good game and be successful in this environment, I think Vanderbilt's got to find a way to control the line of scrimmage, which they did a year ago. They controlled the line of scrimmage for the most part a year ago, and they were able to move the ball quite frequently. They hit some roadblocks early in the second half, but then they kind of got it back together. They ended up winning that game in overtime. So this is their chance to really put a big stamp on their offensive line as far as the confidence goes, as far as their ability to control the line of scrimmage against most teams. Like, their defensive line is one of the better ones they're going to face. This is in the upper half of defensive lines they're going to face. Last week was probably the bottom. The 12th best defense they'll play all year was last week. And they're only 12th because they were on the schedule. They're probably the worst defense they will ever face last week. So, but this week is Virginia Tech, and this week, again, they can get after you. They can be disruptive. They can do some things from a pass rush standpoint, from the interior, from a run stopping standpoint, from the interior and the edges. They're good enough to really lock those things down, and they're good enough to really make it hard for you to find a consistent run lane and to be able to get downhill. Part of what makes a good defensive line in the run game is if they can control the line of scrimmage, if they can get your back to stop, or from our defensive perspective, if we can get their backs to stop and redirect, then that gives them the advantage because they can fight off a block, because the acceleration, just human nature and physics, puts the defense at an advantage in that regard. Now, if running backs are able to get downhill, if they're able to get through the line of scrimmage to the second level untouched, that's where you run into some problems. And Virginia Tech can do that. And Virginia Tech's linebackers aren't as good as their defensive linemen. Their corners are pretty good. Their safeties are pretty good. But overall, I wouldn't say their defense is daunting. I'd say they're disruptive. They're going to make their plays, but they can also give up some yards as well. So this is something that Diego Pavia is really going to have to kind of focus on. And if he's going to do well, they're going to have to control the line of scrimmage, because if they can give Diego Pavia time, he can dissect this defense. He's good enough this year to do so. Last year, I don't think I would have been saying the same thing. I wasn't saying the same thing. I didn't really know a lot about Diego Pavia last year. Nobody did. We knew he was a tough, scrappy kid that was a gamer because of what he did against Auburn 2 years ago when he was still at New Mexico State. That's kind of all we knew Diego Pavia as. So with that, you always had a chance, but we were never really quite sure what we were going to get. But the offensive line controlled the line of scrimmage early and often, more times than they didn't. And this offense was able to feast a little bit last year against Virginia Tech, especially in the first half. They were able to push them around. So I think they're going to look for similar success there, because, again, if you can get movement on their defensive line, if you can crumble their defensive line, this could be that death blow that they need. And this could be that demoralizing thing that would send an already emotionally fragile team over the edge.
Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's a 401k or properties or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I linked all my accounts to Monarch and immediately spotted a few subscriptions I wasn't even using. Canceling those all can save you money every month. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNFL.
The Cardinals need to do these things to be successful on Friday night.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals.
Short week for the Cardinals football team. Second game of the 2025 season tonight against the James Madison Dukes. Both teams sitting in the other receiving votes category of the AP poll. This is a game that's kind of gone back and forth in terms of how tough it's going to be. I had someone ask me, well, what do you actually think is going to happen? Because you mentioned that there's a ton of variation between what could happen. I said, well, I think two things are true at one time. I think that James Madison is a good team. I think that they're better than they are being perceived to be. But I also think that if Louisville handles business, they could win this game by a pretty healthy margin. And that's the reason why we're identifying the keys to success versus the keys to victory, because not only is Louisville expected to win this game, they're expected to win this game by double digits. FanDuel has Louisville as a 13.5-point favorite. So keys to success is going to be explaining not only how Louisville can win the game, but also how they can cover the spread. And the first one is centered around the line of scrimmage, because I find it really intriguing, the different styles of play, like the trademark styles of play from different conferences. Like, for example, Big 12 is all about throwing the football all over the field, scoring a ton of points, and, well, having defense being optional. Big 10 is completely different. The game is won in the trenches. A lot of times it's low scoring. It's a defensive slugfest, unless you're Ohio State and you can score a lot of points. But completely contrasting styles. Well, Sunbelt is sort of like the Big Ten. And Louisville had a front row seat to witness that style back in 2018 when they hired Scott Satterfield from Appalachian State, because Sat tried to adopt a lot of those same principles here at Louisville, winning the game in the trenches on both sides of the football, ground and pound, running the ball a ton, and seeing if other teams could stop it. You know, I disagreed with David Schultz a couple times in our Locked On Podcast Network crossover between Locked On Louisville and Locked On Sunbelt. I didn't agree with his assessment of the Jeff Brom era and how it's gone so far and how good he is as a head coach. I didn't agree with his assessment that Louisville is somehow scared of Syracuse, but what I did agree with was that Sunbelt teams, it feels like they tell you what they're going to try to do, And then they see if you can stop it. Like, we know that James Madison is going to run the football a ton. Now, not every team is a carbon copy of what you expect them to be based upon the perception of the conference, but James Madison's going to run the ball a ton under Bob Chesney. 44 carries, 313 yards, 4 touchdowns on 7.1 yards per carry last week for the Dukes in their opening win against Weber State, the Fighting Damian Lillards. Now, are things going to change up a little bit? Potentially. I think that there's going to be some wrinkles in the game plan for James Madison, but the first key to success here for the Louisville, and it has taken me a little while to get to this point, but I had to introduce that context, controlling the line of scrimmage and winning the game in the trenches. You start on the defensive side. Like, James Madison is going to try to run all over the field. George Pettaway, Wayne Knight, both of these running backs almost getting to 100 yards last week. You're going to see some quarterback run action. Joby, I think it's Mallory, Malary. Like, they have a lot of players that are going to get a portion of that workload and try to throw you off your game. Now, here's the thing. I think Louisville is really well set up to defend the run. Like, I think that's the best thing that this Cardinals defense is at, or that's the best thing that they do. My apologies. That's the best thing that this Louisville defense does, is defend the run. Like, you look back the past 2 years under Jeff Brom, yes, the passing defense has been vulnerable at times. The pass rush at times hasn't been great, but it feels like what has stayed consistent during that time was Louisville's ability to stop the run. And they've got the pieces on this year's team: Renee Conga, Jordan Gerard on the interior, guys that are rotating in, Denzel Lowry and company. Like, this is a really good rotation of interior defensive linemen, and also a rotation of good edge rushers that are going to be able to seal that edge off and make life tough for James Madison. So I think there's been a lot of, well, how can Louisville stop James Madison's run? And not as much of, well, how can James Madison find success against Louisville's defense, especially with how stout they can be in defending the run. It kind of plays into Louisville's strengths here if James Madison's going to run the ball a ton. Now, offensively, this is also something that's kind of getting lost. Like, you switch the sides of the field and you look at the Louisville offense. Like, yeah, James Madison fans are bringing up the fact that they have a good running attack. Hello? Isaac Brown, Duke Watson, anyone? Only one of the best running back duos in the country? Isaac Brown had 6 carries last week. Didn't matter. 126 yards and 2 touchdowns. Yeah, sure. There might be a conversation of how can Louisville stop JMU, but let's flip that question. How can JMU stop Louisville? If you're going to sell out against the run for the Cardinals, good luck defending the wide receivers 1v1. And winning the battle at the line of scrimmage isn't only opening up those gaps for the running backs, it's protecting Miller Moss. And if you can protect Miller Moss and give him time to go through his reads, like, he already makes really quick decisions and quick reads anyway, this is going to be a really tough day at the office for the JMU defense. And look, I respect the Dukes defense. I respect the Dukes team as a whole because they have a deep defensive line. They have a solid back end of the secondary, although the cornerbacks are a little bit questionable. Top end talent at linebacker is solid, although depth is, one thing we have to question. But Amar Thomas, Terry Lockett, Emmanuel Bush, Aiden Gobera on that front, or in that front seven. Like, this is going to be a pretty decent pass rush that Louisville's going up against. And I will admit, the offensive line needs to do a better job of opening up gaps for the running backs than they did last week. I think there were a couple times where EKU was just in the backfield, and not really much you could do about it if your name was Duke Watson, who had 2 carries for 2 yards. But then again, Isaac Brown with a couple of big-time runs. But it's just one of those things where, like, I'm hearing a ton of one side of the argument. But it's like we're forgetting that Louisville's rushing attack is better than James Madison's. No disrespect to the Dukes, Louisville's rushing attack is better than almost every other team in the country. You have Isaac Brown, who probably had the best week for a running back in all of college football last week, despite only getting 6 carries. He's a guy that, who knows? Maybe a Heisman contender if he can continue to play at this level. And I think that all of Card Nation is in unison when believing that he can. So I respect this James Madison team. I know that they're going to try to run the football a ton. They're going to try to set the tone at the line of scrimmage. They're going to try to take away Louisville's rushing attack and force them to throw the football. And I think that still could be a recipe for disaster, because James Madison is much more one-dimensional. Even though they can throw the football, like their identity is based upon running the football, as Louisville's is. But I trust Louisville's passing attack with Chris Bell, Colin Lacey, and Miller Moss than I do James Madison. So controlling the line of scrimmage and winning this game in the trenches is the first and utmost important key to success for the Louisville Cardinals, in my opinion.